proud to be sponsored by Diamond Bright, the car care products that have been keeping the furious fleet looking their best for a long time already. To find all you need to keep your car clean and protected, follow the link below to diamondbright.co.uk.
An Ulster no less, and I'm yelling so you can hear me over the wind. As I'm sure you are aware, the Austin 7 was Britain's pretty much most popular car for most of the 20s and 30s, from 1923 till 1937 in fact. The little 747cc go anywhere, do anything car. It was available in a whole range of body styles, from an open tourer, a two-seater convertible, a closed saloon, even a van. All kinds of things were done with these cars. There's a lot of history and a lot of development story that goes with these. I'm sure you've done your homework and watched my previous Austin 7 video, and so you know all of this already. If you haven't, there's a link up here right now so you can catch up on Austin 7s in general. But today we're going to talk about the Austin 7 Ulster and the specials, because this is an Austin 7 Ulster. So it's got a pointy back end, that's an Ulster. The Ulster goes back to 1927, but not under that name. Originally it was called the Super Sport, and that was a decision in 1927 when Austin were aware that privateers were customising their cars and racing them and doing relatively well, but they wanted a slice of that publicity action. So they decided to start building their own sports version, their own high-performance version of the 7, with a lightweight body, a more powerful engine. So they could sell those privateers their own standardised version, then they could race it themselves and they could cash in on the publicity in-house without any sort of unreliable outside factors being involved. So the old adage of win on Sunday, sell on Monday goes back a lot further than you might think, although the way they may have worded that back in those days is probably a little different. Austin announced the Super Sports in July 1928 off the back of Captain Arthur Waite's winning a race which became later known as the Australian Grand Prix. Now the Super Sport was built around a tourer, so it's got a steel chassis, steel floors, steel bonnet, steel wings, but the rest is aluminium. It's a super lightweight body. It's just an aluminium tub, no doors, so no extra weight there, just a little cut through the step over. The scuttle area is raised slightly. We've lost the big windscreen and we've just got these aero screens. I know they're called aero screens because it says aero screen just there. Round the back we've got this beautiful little pointy boat tail coming down to a straight vertical edge in the final point, almost a barchetta in Italian speak. It's a really pretty little car, sort of going from this sort of snub-nosed front, opening out wider, going to this little point at the back. It's a beautiful thing. These lines are just delightful to look at. In 1929, based on racing experience, they decided that it would be better if they lowered the car to get better handling, so they dropped it 3 inches on the springs, but in order to facilitate that they made a few other changes as well. The front axle beam was bowed to allow for spring clearance. You can't really see it too clearly, but you can just about make it out through this semi-transparent number plate, and they dropped the ends of the radius arms to keep the clearance under the frame rails. You might also have noticed these little big kind of bike type cables down the side of the chassis rails. That's because it's still got cable operated brakes on this thing. Scary. This car does have an electric starter. You can actually see it when you're sitting inside, but this also has a crank handle as well, but because race car, it's lightened. I do like that. I do believe that's a more modern modification. Now, to get under the bonnet to look at the engine, there's none of that tedious messing around with bonnet pulls and releases and that kind of stuff. It's good old-fashioned leather straps here. And with the straps undone, you can actually lift the entire bonnet away. Now, I should probably mention where the name Ulster came from. This is because in 1929, the cars did so well in the Ulster Tourist Trophy, the name just kind of stuck. And all these little kind of bobtail, fast, lightweight, extra powerful Austin 7s became known as Ulsters instead of Super Sports. Now here's where it starts getting complicated to try and explain the spec precisely. After the Second World War, there became a massive aftermarket in modifying Austin 7s into specials for hill climbing, racing, sprinting, all kinds of motorsport. This was Britain's answer to hot rodding. Modified Austin 7s were literally everywhere. Anyone who wanted to do any kind of motorsport cheaply bought an old Austin 7 and took it racing. And so that's what this car is. It was actually modified in 1991. So it's actually quite a late addition to the modified Austin 7 scene. However, factory Super Sports actually came with a supercharger attached. It was actually a French Cosette No. 4 size supercharger built under license by Delaney Radiators in Britain. It had been mounted down here on the near side of the car, and it was gear driven. They also gave the car a water pump as well. Now this was all fed by a 1 5/16 inch or 33mm SU carburettor sitting up here on top of the engine. Now, apparently the production cars going off to customers were good for 27 horsepower at 4,500 RPM, which is pretty high revving for a pre-war flathead engine like that. The works cars, which are tuned a little bit harder, were thought to make about 15% more than that. Now, fuel came in through this little tiny SU carburettor at the top of the engine on the near side, and the exhaust gases exited just below it through a 3-branch manifold here onto the outside of the car, right by the passenger's arm. But don't worry, because there is some exhaust wrap around it because safety. Inside the Ulster Supersport engines, they were heavily reworked. They had stronger conrods, thicker main journals. The crankshafts, ground from a chunk of billet, were fully counterbalanced, and they had pressure-fed lubrication. These are pretty advanced engines for the day. And this car, which was built more latterly, uses a fairly common high-performance Austin 7 trick. In fact, it uses Honda pistons in the engine, which are good for better compression and power. Now, when you look inside this engine bay, you notice a few things. The 2-blade heavy steel fan, the big kind of open core radiator. Obviously, we've already mentioned the little SU carburettor, and just a single trumpet air inlet, so it's really loud and snorty. But the fact the engine is so tiny and so far forward, and the elephant in the room, or rather fuel tank in the room, is this big metal fuel tank sitting on the scuttle right in front of you, so best not to crash, really. That's a given in most situations, I should say. Now, climbing in isn't exactly dignified. The steering wheel's quite big, the seats are quite far forward, and this door cutout aperture thing isn't particularly big. I'm guessing people had smaller feet back in the 20s. And once you're in, you're staying there. Ow, I can't get money past the wheel. Okay, right, let's talk about the interior. Now, if you thought the interior was Spartan on the saloon version of the 7, this takes it to a whole new level in here. There is nothing apart from instruments in this car. Now, I've climbed in, I'm sat on the seat, but the seat is basically on the floor, and all it is this little leather cushion. Quite nice, it's soft enough, it's fairly comfortable, and your back is like a bucket seat back, which is kind of moulded into the rear bulkhead of the car. Underneath the passenger seat, you do have a very, very tiny little battery. And in the interest of lightness, there is literally nothing in terms of comfort, because this is basically a racing car, so you've got nothing lining. You're just looking at the painted back of the aluminium body panels. Now, the original cars did have an ash frame. This one does look like it's got a metal frame in it instead. There's no carpet, obviously. You're just looking at the transmission tunnel, and looking through this gap where the fly-off handbrake lives, there is, well, there's the UJ on the back of the gearbox. I can see that rotating as the car moves. Down on the floor where my feet are, I've got a clutch, brake and accelerator, thankfully in the right order, because Austin 7s did kind of set that trend around the world. It was licensed to BMW as the Dixie. In Japan it was copied, that was Datsun. And in America, Cadillac used the same layout as well. And so between Cadillac and Austin, they kind of set the global standard with clutch, brake, accelerator. One thing I wish they had done is left a little bit more space around them, because I can get my foot onto the brake just about. I can only kind of have to turn my foot sideways to get it onto the accelerator. And the clutch travel is so short. I mean, it's kind of 2 or 3 centimeters from on to off. I actually thought it was broken when I first climbed in the car, and you've heard people talk about a binary clutch. This is as binary as it comes. It's off, then it's on. It's snap and you're gone. So you have to make sure you're getting your revs matched just right. Other things you have to practice and concentrate on are the gears. It's a 3-speed gearbox. They had a higher intermediate range on the second gear when they were new, which meant they had more pulling power to get out of corners on road courses. But the interesting thing with this is the layout is different. Instead of being 1, 2, 3 and then reverse down here, it's reversed. So 1 is where 4th would normally be, so it's towards me and back. 2nd is where 1st would normally be, and 3rd is where 2nd would normally be, and reverse is where 3rd would normally be. So I'm sure we'll figure this out as we go along. What's the worst that can happen? To the left of my foot, where the gear stick is going into the top of the gearbox, you can see through the bulkhead to the back of the engine. I can see the aluminium casting around the back of the engine, and the starter motor is sitting here on top of it as well, so you can see and hear that in operation. In fact, you can see everything is just here. It's visceral, and you can smell the petrol, the oil. You can see the grease on the top of the gear linkage. So it's all just very, very real and in your face. There aren't many controls. There's more readouts than controls. Starting on the left nearest to you, we've got a Smith's stopwatch. So if you're on an event, you can keep track with that. Then we have this air pressure meter, which is a curious thing to find. Even more curiously, the job of the co-driver will be to man this pump. That's not air pump, that's the fuel pump. So every now and then when you're driving, you do have to keep an eye on that and just give that a little snifter just to keep it rolling and keep the fuel pressure at a decent level. So something to bear in mind when we're on the road. Then we've got our oil pressure, so hopefully it'll be sitting somewhere in about the right place. Then it's dominating the centre of the dashboard, the speedo, which goes up to 100 miles an hour. Now apparently these were advertised at 84 miles an hour, which is a little conservative because at Brooklands they were believed to have lapped at over 90 in 1929. Now, I believe this car, according to the trip meter, has done 7,393 miles since it was built. Not very far at all. Tucked behind the steering wheel, we've got a couple of switches. One of the on switches for the car is the charging decision. So summer half charge, winter full charge when you're driving with your headlights on. So you need to remember to switch this on so that it does start the charging circuits up before you set off and run your batteries flat. And then a little switch here for side lights and headlights. And finally on the right hand side we've got our rev counter, which although I don't think it actually does go up as far as 6,000 RPM, but this little Smith's meter does go up to 6,000 RPM. I think 4,500 is the actual sort of sensible red line on one of these, but we won't be taking it that far today. And finally on the dashboard, well there's a little switch here which I think might be for the indicators, which has been added on later on, so I'm not quite sure what that one's for. Finally we have the patents embodied of the Austin 7 plaque, which we found in the saloon as well. All these little frame and suspension, connecting rod lubrication, steering gear, detachable wheels. They were very, very proud, and I guess quite rightly worried about their patents being nicked. So this is slap bang in the centre of the dashboard. You can sit here and read your patents when you're driving if you're bored on a race somewhere. The steering wheel is actually quite large. It's not really very big, but in the context of this vehicle, it does feel quite big, and it's very, very hard indeed. And without even a nod towards safety, there is this extra little hand levers in the centre of the steering wheel. You don't want to be stopping this too hard into anything solid because there's no seat belts and solid metal things to bash your face into. So we won't be doing that today. There's no other areas in this car to talk about. This other area here is not a boot space, it's actually where the spare wheel hides. I think we've talked enough, let's take it for a ride. Okay, so starting the car, turn it to summer half charge, power on the big switch down on the floor, the big kind of safety cut off, foot on the clutch and hit the starter button. Keep an eye on the fuel pressure, we're good there. Okay, so let's find reverse, which is up where fourth would be, fly up handbrake. Way and not a great turning circle, surprisingly. Now I know why. You see, I know movies, cars kind of scamper away at a ridiculous rate because you have to just snap off the accelerator and catch it. There's no travel on any of the pedals at all. And it's just a wonderful little view down the bonnet. The steering just darts left and right everywhere. It catches every little bump in the road and takes you with it. Let's just try the brakes. It's kind of got brakes. This is just enormous fun. It really is. Enough wind in the hair, flies in the teeth. These aero screens really don't do a lot. And it just wanders everywhere. I doubt you can hear a thing I'm saying because the wind is right in the microphone. job keeping this thing on the road. Oh my word, the bounciness is incredible. You just hear the exhaust over your left shoulder the whole time. It's fantastic. Well, if you're not if you're following it. Okay, stopping is double D clutch if you can. Oh, the brakes are not inspiring you with confidence. This car is currently for sale at Percival Motors in Kent. Check out the link in the description below. It's got quite a turn of speed once you get going.
Without the weight of the body or interior, this thing feels just so light on the road and really fast as well. This is actually so exciting to drive, it's brilliant.
Mustn't forget to keep pumping the fuel. Oh, this is hilarious. I love this thing. I need an Austin 7 in my life. It just rattles and shimmies everywhere. I cannot imagine doing 90 miles an hour in one of these things. It is just absolutely hilarious. So little control. When I know this is a bouncy little back lane, I have no idea how fast I'm going because the speedo doesn't work. But I'm going to guess about 35. Second stage, they can run the headlights. I'm not sure what the idea behind that was. Now I'm going to be turning off in about a mile, so I need to start thinking about the brakes anytime soon. These things are just so much fun. You are literally driving by the skin of your teeth. All over the place in terms of bouncing on the chassis. It's got a bit of double D clutch.